Hey everybody, welcome to our Behind the Taproom webinar today. I'm really excited to introduce our two guest speakers today from Jackie O's out in Athens, Ohio. We've got with us today Ryan Oldham, the Director of Lab Operations at Jackie O's, and Jarret Cosby, the Lead Lab Technician. And they're gonna walk us through their QC program and show us all of the things behind the scenes in their lab, which is going to be really awesome. This is our last Behind the Taproom tour for the spring season. We'll be back hopefully in the fall to bring you more of these. I know we kind of started this off because we couldn't go actually visit labs anywhere, but it's been such a fun time being able to see the different breweries that we've got to keep this going. So we hope you'll join us when we get back on track with this. Before I let our speakers kind of take over, I want to give you all the rundown for our webinars if you haven't been in them before. For these, we do about a 40 to 45 minute tour. So we'll let Ryan and Jarret show us all the things that are going on in their labs. And then after that, we will take questions, Q&A time, which is always sometimes the funnest time because you get all these questions from everybody out there that you've been thinking about during their talk. To throw cute questions out to us, you want to go to the Q&A button that is somewhere on your screen, depending on the device you have. It could be at the top, the bottom, or anywhere on your device, but look for that Q&A. It should look like that. And type your question in at any time. It can be while we're talking, that's totally fine. If you key up some questions, then when we get to Q&A time, we'll start with those right away. If you want to share some information like that goes along with what they're talking about, feel free to pop it in the chat or in the Q&A. And then if you have a question that is a little bit too challenging, sometimes that happens, to write into the Q&A, or you want to just speak it out loud, raise your hand and I'll try to keep an eye on those as well as we go forward. That's it for kind of our webinar rundown. I didn't even introduce myself. I always forget that part, but I'm Lucy Benedict. I am the director of the QC2 Lab at the University of Southern Maine. If you haven't heard about us, we are a testing, research, and education lab for craft beverage, mainly craft breweries. And we're run by myself, Sam White, our lab coordinator, and a group of undergraduate students that do all of the testing for us after they've been trained and work on research projects and help with some of these webinars. So all the funding that we get through our testing services goes to support our students in their education in this lab. So we thank all of you who have tested with us or gone through some of our other webinars. And we hope if you haven't, that you give us you check us out. So that's everything I've got. So I am going to pass the mic, I wish I could, over to Ryan and Jarret and stop sharing my screen and let them take the show.
All right. Hi, everyone. Sharing. Okay. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan, and this is Jarret.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, today we're going to just, this is the outline right now. We're going to go ahead and just do like a bit of an intro to Jackie O's and how we got started. Ryan's going to go over that. And currently I'm in the lab, so I'll be doing the lab tour and also talking about the sensory program. And then Ryan is pretty much going to take over the rest with bottle conditioning, calculations, barrel aging, how she started up the lab. She's been here a lot longer than I have, so she'll also be talking about yeast propagation. That's fairly new to what we've been doing. And then also them making it right and the current research that she is doing as well. So yeah, we hand it over to Ryan for the intro to Jackie O's.
Thanks, Jarret. So just to give everybody a little idea of the size of Jackie O's and how we've grown. So in 2006, the owner purchased a brew pub that was formerly a brew pub called O'Hooley's. This is kind of what it looks like up here in our restaurant side of the brew pub, restaurant part of the brew pub. So from 2006 to 2013, that was the only brewing space for Jackie O's. There's a 7-barrel brew house, 5 7-barrel fermenters. There are a bunch of these old Grundy milk tanks from the 1920s or 30s down in the basement that we pour off of, that we serve draft off of up into the brew pub bar. There's 3 sour bright tanks down there and a bunch of sour oak barrels that you can see kind of crammed into this little basement. This picture here is a photo of the brew house, sort of, here on the left, and right here on the right is the bar. So in this photo, in the very back up here on top, that's where our brew house is. And then up towards the front of the building is where all the fermenters are. And then on the bottom right, this is a photo of the front of the production facility of Jackie O's. So in 2013, Jackie O's bought this, what used to be a glass factory and a cheese barn, and converted it into a brewery. So from the beginning, we've had a 20-barrel brew house there. Currently, we're brewing about 18 batches a week on that brew house. Somewhere between 13 and 15,000 barrels a year, I think, is what we hit last year. By 2014, we had 9 40s and 2 20-barrel fermenters. In 2016, we expanded the building, maybe tripling or quadrupling the size of it, and added 6 new 120-barrel fermenters. Sorry. We also got a 120-barrel bright and a 240-barrel bright at that time. And then in 2018, we purchased a bunch of new equipment and got a centrifuge from Alpha Laval. We got a new bottler and a pasteurizer. In 2019, we started our yeast propagation in-house. So we purchased some equipment for that. And just last year, we got 4 more 40-barrel fermenters and also purchased a new space in Columbus, Ohio. So Athens, Ohio is a pretty small town. The only thing that's really here is a college and a few breweries, but it's a relatively small town. Columbus is a bigger city and it gives us the opportunity to sell a lot more retail. And there will be a patio and bar and brewing to come this year in that place, in that facility.
Okay, thank you. So what we're gonna do is kind of right now I'm gonna take you on sort of what I do in a day-to-day basis as a brewery lab technician. I started here in December 31st of 2018 on New Year's Eve. With my first day, I graduated from Ohio University only a couple weeks before with a bachelor's in chemistry. So, but yeah, so I've been working for about 2.5 years now. Looking back at it, it's amazing how much I've learned since then. And on the way, you don't really comprehend how much exactly you're learning. Just today, Ryan had to leave early, so I was pitching the yeast into the Carlsbergs for propagation and then knocking out wort into our propagation tank, which if you would have told me to do that 2 years ago, I would have been absolutely terrified. And now it's just, you just get into a routine of things. And so, yeah, I'm pretty much going to tell you, a normal routine for me. I only work 4 10-hour shifts. I work 4 days a week. I will come in first of the week. I usually start on Tuesdays. I'll come in and I'll see what cellar has been doing. There's 2 whiteboards down in the brewery because our lab is upstairs. So yeah, I'll go down there, and what we'll do is I'll take a picture of the board and I'll come upstairs and pretty much analyze and see, like, okay, what has been moving, what moved from a fermenter to a bright, what got dry hopped, did Raspy get, fermented with Raz yet? Things like that. And then, I'll go into the walk-in cooler downstairs. We'll have cell counts from previous pitches of yeast from one fermenter to another. Want to make sure that that pitch was healthy and alive and is going to ferment well. And then also, just normal things, finding cans and whatnot and alexing them or alkalizing them to check ABV, make sure that everything is in spec and we're releasing good beer. Like I said, I'll come in. Ryan, if you want to, real quick, I'm going to share that screen of the lab floor diagram. I have this lab floor diagram. Ryan introduced this a year and a half ago or so. This thing is awesome. This is a great program. As you can see, we have everything that's on our brewery floor is inputted into this diagram right here. So, like I said, I'll go downstairs, I'll check the whiteboards, and then I'll take a picture of it, bring it back upstairs. I'll take everything in the picture, and then I will immediately just put it right onto this diagram. And what that allows us to do is it helps us keep track of what has been plated, as you can see by our dinner plates here. And then what's dry hopped, as you can see, and razzed and things like that. And we have pretty much every single tank that is in our brewery is on this page. As you can see, there's quite a lot. And then we have even our sour program that doesn't get updated as much. It's a little less, you don't need as much care for that. But yeah, so, we bring it up here, and as you can see, I did give it a plating today on the 25th, but deciding what needs to be plated, say a new beer got knocked out into a fermenter yesterday, well, that's going to be plated today. Make sure that, it was a clean knockout, that the beer is going to be, we don't want to have a beer sit in a fermenter if it's going to be infected. Obviously that's just a waste of tank space. And so, earlier the better. Dry hopping, say, a beer gets dry hopped, but something goes wrong during the dry hop and it can get infected. We also, want to know that before we start packaging it. So if a beer got dry hopped yesterday, that will also be plated today. Same with Raz. Raz will, it's in the fermenter for a day, it gets Raz. We want to check that, make sure it's okay. If anything gets moved from the fermenter into a bright tank as well. Pretty much anything that happens to a beer will need plated, just to, make sure. And same with like bright tanks. If things get moved in the bright tanks, we want to know. We'll alex it, and we can get the information about that right here. Things like that. And yeah, it's this is a great program. Just it's called I believe it's Lab, was it Draw.io or something like that?
It's like draw.io or something. It's like a free Google.
Great program. It makes it, a lot easier to remember what's going on in the brewery, and you have that a lot, having the lab upstairs compared to downstairs where everything's happening. You want to have a way to mainstream that, what's going on downstairs, upstairs. And this is just a great thing to have for that. Great program, things like that. And then another thing I want to do, I'm going to stop sharing if you want to go ahead and screen share yours again. But, come into the day and, check everything, need to see what is going to get plated today. Check the cell counts, yeast pitches. Those will need as, cell counted and viability checked and whatnot. We'll do that. And then, plating cans, all those samples that I talked about, and same with barrels. Say that we have barrels coming into the brewery soon that are going to get racked out into a tank and then bottled. We want those barrels to be tested before we blend all of them into one tank, because nothing is worse than having 20 barrels go into a tank and have one barrel that's infected, and it ruins the whole batch. You want to be able to figure that out before you combine all those barrels. So Ryan mostly does that. She'll go out to the warehouse, our warehouse cellar director guy who does a lot of barrel testing. He'll make the blend and he'll tell us, okay, it's ready. Here's what barrels he plated. Ryan will go over, grab the samples and plate those. And so yeah, all those, barrels, plate in barrels and tanks and cans, those all in bright tanks, those all get plated on 3 main medias, LCSM, which is Linz cupric sulfate media, and UBA, which is universal beer agar, and also HLP, which is, I believe, Lactobacillus. So all 3 of those get plated in there. They're all aerobic except for HLP, that itself creates an anaerobic environment in test tubes. We just do those in 15 ml test tubes where you'll do about 5 milliliters of beer and 10 milliliters of HLP. And the only time that we make an exception to that is when we plate bottles. We're very serious when it comes to bottles and plating. We want to make sure that nothing is wrong with them. That's definitely the highest risk thing, is with our barrel aged beers. It'll always have the highest risk of infection. So our bottle machine has 6 fill heads. So we'll take a bottle from each fill head. We'll bring it upstairs and we'll plate those. But instead of all aerobic except for the HLP, we'll have 2 sets of UVA plates. So when you're plating it, you'll have 3 plates, 1 LCSM and 2 UVAs. And we'll take one of those UVA plates and we'll throw that into an anaerobic chamber, which will leave it so it has no oxygen and practically recreate the environment that it is in the bottle, because the bottle itself is an anaerobic environment. So we would want to replicate that, because bacteria can grow in anaerobic environments and we need to know if there is something growing in there. So yeah, that's the only thing that really is different from tanks and cans and all that. But yeah, also another thing, like daily, we only have 1 lab tech, which is me. So a lot of breweries, they'll have people designated just to make media. So that's another thing, you want to be on top of making media, because especially on those bottling days, you can have 2 bottling runs in one day, and there you go, there's 24 UVA plates gone in one day. So like, I know this week, Thursday, we're bottling 2 bottles. So there's probably about 40 UVA plates in there right now, but I know in my head, like, okay, well, we're going to need UVA plates, so might as well stock up on those. That's the part that nobody wants to talk about in quality control of brewing, is making media. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, for sure, but it needs, it's just one of those things that needs to be done. So yeah, I mean, and then like the Alex 500, we have one from Anton Parr. I'll show you that a little bit later. If you want to do lab tour equipment right now, that's fine, actually. I'm on a laptop, so this would be a little weird to tour, but if you look behind me, sitting behind me right now, we have the autoclave right here. This closest, it's a Tuttenauer. It's a small little guy, but it does everything we need to. We autoclave media in it a bunch, and also parts for propagation, things like that. And so yeah, we have that. Also, we use to grab samples from the fermenters. We used to use plastic tubes, but we're trying to reduce, the waste of all those. So we switched to little tiny 50 ml bottles, which I have one right here. We'll get.
Jarret, I'm going to stop sharing so that you become bigger.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, so we have these little 50 ml bottles. They're adorable. We use these to grab samples now. We just autoclave them, put some autoclave tape on, make sure they're sterile. And we use those. And then right here, you see these 2 little box things right here. Those are our incubators. We have 2 of them. We could definitely use a bigger one, or even like a 3rd one, but they work fine. It also just helps us keep cleaning them out, I guess, because I've had a microbiology class before, and you can have incubators the size of fridges, which are great. But yeah, so those are incubators. I'll show you inside one of them real quick. I'm going to carry you. So this is our incubator. And as you can see, we got a few plates in here right now. These were just plated today. And then this is our anaerobic chamber right here. So we have some bottles in here right now that were plated that are just going to be sitting in there. So we have these little gas packs that suck out all the oxygen and leave it into an anaerobic environment. And yeah, so then we move into one of the most used in our lab is our laminar flow hood. We do all of our aseptic plating and media pouring in this hood. It's definitely you'll spend a lot of time in there. You can see the Bunsen burner. That thing will get very hot, so you can work up a sweat while you're plating. And then also down here we have our water bath with our sous vide. That is great for keeping media at temperature. So you can set it at a certain temp, and also helps cool down media a little bit faster if you need to. And then our pH meter is right here. We use that for bottles. We like to keep a track of pH on, and then same for yeast pitches. We like to measure the pH. Just keeps us informed, just a standard pH meter, nothing fancy. And then here is our ductless fume hood. We use this for making HLP just to be safe. Yeah, but I mean, this is pretty much exclusively only for HLP. We don't really use it for much more than that. And then over here, we have Albert Einstein. We have this, this is a spectrometer. We just got this, so we really haven't touched it much at all. Ryan, I believe, said that she did some research, and it's pretty much only going to be able to measure SRM.
I think it was, sorry, my mom's phone is ringing. But I think it was made from 1960 to 1970.
Yeah, it's old, but I mean, it'll be nice if we want to measure SRM on a beer. We can, but we haven't really touched it yet. It definitely looks its age, but that's okay. And then here we have our Anton Par Alex 500. This is quite the machine. We've definitely had some troubles with it. If anybody has one of these, please let us know, because I remember we've had some problems with it. We tried Googling it and everything, and I'm pretty sure we're one of the only breweries that actually own one of these things. So if you have one, please let us know. And also over here, we have our microscope, and then our hot plate / stir plate. We have quite a few stir plates, but this is our main one we use for just cell counts and mostly, making media, things like that. And I left this little cube beaker out right here. This is our 10 ml beaker. We use these to dilute cell counts. We have 3 of them. So if we need to dilute down to 100 or 1,000 times dilution, we can do that. And yeah, we have a couple fridges here as well. We keep media in there, and then this one stores some other things. Nothing really fancy. There's just some, cyclohexamide and methylene blue in there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's really not too big of a lab. Definitely. I mean, there's definitely bigger labs, but yeah, for us, it works perfectly well. I mean, it's nothing crazy, but yeah, if we want to go into sensory now, we can do that. So I'm going to take you into the conference room, which is also our kind of a makeshift sensory room. So I'm going to just hide my screen real quick while I walk over, and then I will share it again once I get there. Okay, so start video again. Try not to get an ugly video of myself. Okay, great. So this is our sensory room, aka conference room. Used to be conference room. So yeah, sensory room, as far as it goes, these booths are great for what we need. We'll go over a little bit. We have these nice little glasses. I think these are about 4 or 6 ounce snifters. They're super nice, and we have a bunch of those for sensory. So yeah, I'll go ahead and put this right here. And yeah, so as you can see behind me, we have these booths. We have about 5 of them right now. And they just they're actually like, I think they're just kind of like desk, but they work perfectly for little dividers. And we have these white sheets up here. That's nice to have a nice little backdrop for showing, seeing the true color of a beer. And we also have these white LEDs up here as well. And then here we have a nice beer flavor map. Each booth has one of those to, you know, help panelists describe what they're, you know, smelling or tasting or what they're getting in a flavor. But yeah, so as far as Century goes, you know, obviously a Century program is super important. You know, you want to taste exactly what the customer is tasting, and you want to make sure that you don't release beer that tastes less than, you know, optimal. And I haven't been doing Century for very long. I think it's been about maybe like 9 or so months I've been doing it. I kind of just fell into this. And honestly, it's been really fun. And I think, you know, one of the things is, you know, at first I joined this and it's like, it's fun, you know, it's a great thing to do. Give people these, you know, beers and, you know, decide what goes on panel. But also you need to realize that this is like a very serious thing. You know, sensory is important for a brewery. And, you know, as it says, our main goal, you know, you never want to release a beer that, you know, is, you know, has diacetyl or acetaldehyde really bad. You want to avoid that happening, as, you know, you never want to release a beer like that. And so like I figured, you know, training wise, we're going through a training routine right now. I think it's about, is it 4 weeks, three sessions?
It's 3 sessions a week for 3 weeks, I think. Or no, you're right, 4 weeks.
So there's 3 sessions for 4 weeks, going over things, you know, just basic like modalities and, you know, flavor attributes, things like that. And, you know, etiquette on how to, you know, approach a panel, things like that. We use a company or a program called Draft Lab. It's a very nice program. It lets you set up tasting sessions, so you can have a description test for like a new beer you're releasing, or you can have a true to target test for a beer that you've released multiple times. You want to make sure that this beer is true to target. And so it's a good program for that. It even has hedonic testing, which is you go in and just rate the beer, like you like it extremely, you like it moderately, you dislike it, you know, you hate it, things like that. So we use that. Sampling points of, you know, when I go into a day of sensory and you know, usually you're not wasting people's time by just randomly picking a beer. Like you go downstairs, you find a random, you know, quality control beer, you just pick it out of the shelf and serve it. But it's better to realize why you're picking that beer. You know, one of the things I mainly focus on are bright tanks. Being able to catch a beer before it goes through packaging. You know, say you get a 120 barrel bright tank and you go and, you know, bring that in a Century the day before it's getting packaged, and you find out, oh, there's something wrong with it. Well, then right there, you just saved a ton of money in raw ingredients like cans, but you also saved a lot of time of workers, you know, that are just going to be working, putting beer into a can that's eventually just going to get dumped anyways. But so yeah, you know, and another thing I've learned a lot is a beer can change so much in 3 days in a can. You could get, you know, it used to be, I would get, you know, say we would have a canning run of Mystic Mom or something. And that day I would take a beer from the canning line, just bring it up and run sensory on it. And then, you know, turns out, you know, 3 days later, that beer, something happened to it. You know, maybe it doesn't taste as good. Some oxygen got into a beer and, you know, maybe it produced some diacetyl. So a lot of things I've been doing is waiting about 3 days, a minimum, to test a beer. Is you know, we get a 6-pack each run from beers. I like to sit it out at room temp, wait 3 days, and then pop it in the fridge the morning before sensory, and then later that day serve it, because a beer can change so much in 3 days. It's crazy. Like you test a beer one day, it tastes fantastic, and then 3 days later, it's like, whoa, what happened? You know. But yeah, it's the things I was just going over things I learned about like that, and you know, panelists can lack a lot of confidence as well. I noticed like you can trick panelists very easily. I remember one of my favorite ones was grabbing a 6-pack from the canning line and taking a beer, like 3 beers off that 6-pack, the same exact 6-pack, and running 3 different true to target tests on it. You can get 3 different, you can get like different answers for each one. So that's why that training is important. You want to make sure, you know, have these tests. You want your panelists to be confident going into training. So yeah, and then, you know, secondary goal prevent waste of labor and ingredients. Kind of went over that with the bright tank. And another good thing would be to, we don't do it very often, but we need, we're always trying to improve. It's a little hard. We don't have that many employees in our brewery right now. So I know some breweries, they'll run a sensory panel 2-3 times a day, even they'll have someone dedicated to just doing sensory. They can afford to like catch a beer right before it's being dry hopped, like an hour before it's being dry hopped. They can bring a beer upstairs or in panel and then boom, sensory it real quick and make sure that it's tasting good before they waste hundreds, if not thousands of dollars putting hops into a tank. But yeah, so yeah, sensory program, we do well on it, I believe. There's always room for improvement as well, and we're learning that, Ryan and I both, I believe. But yeah, some breweries, they'll have these amazing like sensory booths where you'll be served glasses through the booth. They'll open a door and you'll get served and you won't have any clue what the beer is. But we just bring glasses right here on this conference room table. I'll pour the glasses and then I'll make sure to hide, when the can was, when the beer was canned and things like that. So as to, try to not to influence responses, but yeah, it works for us. And yeah, that's just a quick overview of that and sensory in our lab. So I think that's all. If you have anything else to add, Ryan, if not, take it away.
I think that was great.
All right, great. I'm gonna run back to the lab real quick.
Cool. Thanks, Jarret. So one of the things I wanted to share was just our bottle conditioning, I guess math. I'm not necessarily going to show all the math here, but basically this was pretty confusing to me when we first started bottle conditioning. I had trouble trying to learn basically how to calculate how much sugar we want to add to a bottling run to a tank before we package it. Corey King from Side Project was kind enough to share with me what they do, and that kind of gave me a basis for how we calculate our dosing rates. So mainly it's a function of the extract that your pre-packaged beer already contains, how much carbon dioxide you want to add to the tank. We assume, this seems to work for us, we pretty much assume that a flat bright tank has roughly 0.8 volumes of CO2 in it already. And that pretty much works really well for us. We also assume that a change in 1 degree Plato, so a decrease in 1 degree Plato during fermentation would produce roughly 2.5 volumes of CO2 actually, so it's quite a bit. So that's what we base our math on. It's also a function of the density of the beer. And so for 95%, if not more, of our bottle conditioning runs, we just use dextrose, which is about 91% fermentable. So that goes into our equation as well. However, we do sometimes dose some beers with other sugar sources, such as honey or orange juice. So we pretty much do all the same math. The only thing that changes is that 91% fermentability of dextrose. So we can determine the percent fermentability of honey or orange juice or anything like that pretty much by throwing a bunch of yeast into it and stirring it and measuring the change in gravity. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we do our barrel aging here at Jack Hughes. So we pretty much don't put anything into a barrel that's less than 10% ABV. Most of what we do are stouts and barley wines when it comes to barrel aging. And we mainly use bourbon barrels for our clean barrel aging program. So first we fill the barrels once a beer is done fermenting in our clean room. Then we, okay, so you can see here basically the way that we do it. We'll line up all these barrels. We'll take out all the hard bungs that are in them, spray it off with ISO, and then cover the tops of each barrel, cover the hole with a piece of foil that's been sprayed with alcohol. In the meantime, we can start gassing the barrels. So we'll purge them all with CO2, you can see here. And then once the barrel's purged with CO2, it's ready to be filled. We'll kind of just go down the line like that. So purging here, filling back here where it's already been purged. And then we take them to our barrel warehouse, where they rest for maybe 10 to 14 months, usually on average. Currently, we have about 600 clean bourbon barrels in our warehouse aging. And then once they're ready, ish, I don't know, once they've been in the barrel for 10 months or so, we'll start plating all of them. When we know it's getting close to blending time, we just kind of wait until they've had as much time as possible to potentially be contaminated until we start plating. So we'll plate everything. Ideally, we plate everything, all the barrels, before they start blending, so then they know what to avoid. They don't even have to worry about that. But then, of course, all the barrels will be tasted. We have 2 to 4 people that routinely do our barrel blending. So they'll go over, drill all the barrels, pull samples of each of them. They try each barrel individually, and then they can start messing with some blends of the different barrels. And so all the barrels that have passed both lab and sensory testing will then be racked out into a bright tank. We use this device called a racketeer. Looks kind of just like this setup, except we're going out of barrel instead of into it. At that time too, if we want to condition the beer on anything, that's when we do that. We don't ever condition things before it goes into a barrel. So there'll be maybe some adjuncts in a bright tank waiting for these barrels, and then we can move barrels on top, the beer on top of those adjuncts, and let them condition. And once the beer is ready, we pasteurize it and package it. We have a inline pasteurizer rather than a tunnel pasteurizer. We chose that option because 1, it takes up a lot less space, and 2, that means that we can pasteurize really any liquid in our brewery. And we have learned that pasteurization of even pale ales seems to work for us and not affect flavor. But mainly we don't pasteurize everything. We only pasteurize barrel-aged beer, but then occasionally, if we have a tank that we know that's contaminated, we can also pasteurize that. So once it's been packaged, we test the bottles again, as Jarret said. And then we have a 15-day incubation, which I'll talk about in a minute. But once the beer passes lab, we can go ahead and release it. So I just wanted to give a little overview too of how we started up our lab. So when I started at the brewery, I started at Jackie O's in 2011 working as a server and a bartender. And then in 2015, I started working at the production facility, sort of starting the lab testing stuff. So originally, when we first started any sort of lab program, we did not have a lab. We had this table in a merch closet. And we were lucky enough to be able to access the biochemistry lab at Ohio University here in Athens. We worked closely with one of the professors there, and so he was letting me and one other guy, basically there was one guy named Patrick that worked a couple days a week for a few months doing plating. He was commuting pretty far though, so then ultimately he started training me on it. So I was going over to the OU Biochem lab and making media and plating. I was doing that, I think 2 days a week is the lab time that we had over there. They wouldn't let me bring beer cans or bottles into the lab though. So I was trying to pull aseptic samples the way that Patrick was doing it. I learned quickly that that wasn't it wasn't a good way to do it. Basically, there was no flame. We were just kind of ISOing the top of the can and opening it with the ISOed can opener and then pouring it into a test tube. That did not work. So eventually I started using a blowtorch to at least pull my samples before I took them over to plate them. So when we didn't have a lab, I did end up buying a microscope. That was the first thing that we bought. This is our microscope sitting on that table when that's all we had. In the meantime, Jackie O's was expanding the brewery and building a lab space, which eventually grew. For example, at first we didn't even have a Bunsen burner, so I had to use this alcohol lamp. It also does not work very well. It didn't get very hot. And then you guys saw kind of what the lab looks like today. So I would say basically these 5 items here on the left are the items that really kind of got us up and running with our micro program. I tried plating in a few different rooms in the brewery that I thought I could shut the door and use this alcohol lamp and make it as clean as possible, but lots of false positives, and the hood was a game changer basically. Also having an autoclave saved us a lot of money on ordering pre-made plates, or because you can't order pre-made plates if you don't have an autoclave. And yeah, another note, you can also use a pressure cooker if you don't have an autoclave. We found a lot of our equipment used also and saved some money that way. So our yeast propagation program started just last year, or in 2019. But the way that we do it pretty much is we will streak out ideally a fresh pitch or glycerol stock onto a plate. We can take 1 isolated colony of that particular strain, and then we move it into 10 milliliters of malt broth. We'll shake or stir it for about a day, and then we pretty much we increase by 10 times going into 100 mils. Then we move into 500 mils. Then we go into 2 liters, and then we can put this roughly 2.5 liters into our little Alpha Laval Carlsberg that has a 20-liter capacity with wort. And then after a day in the Carlsberg, we can go ahead and move it into our 5-barrel prop tank. So the prop tank has a 5-barrel capacity, but the rule of thumb that I've generally learned is you don't want to step up your prop volume by more than 10 times for any step. So this Carlsberg is 5.4 gallons or something with the yeast in it. So then we add 54 gallons of wort in our prop tank for day 1. And then day 2 of the prop, we can fill this tank up, and then we can go ahead and pitch either our 59 gallons into a 40-barrel fermenter or 159 gallons into a 120-barrel fermenter. And so if you guys are familiar with Jackie O's, maybe you are aware of our Making It Right program that happened in 2017 and 2018. Ultimately, we ended up with at least 10 to 12 brands that we started getting emails about 6 months or so after they had been released. We went and ran sensory on these beers, and turns out they were definitely going bad. The problem was I couldn't find anything wrong with them in the lab, and I couldn't get anything to grow. With a lot of help actually from Zach and Mike at Allagash, we ended up figuring out through their PCR runs that it was lactobacillus acetotolerance that contaminated these beers. And ultimately, also with their help, I figured out that the reason that I couldn't grow the acetotolerance was because of the temperature I was incubating at, the time I was incubating for, and the concentration of my beer to HLP. So I used to do, I think most people may learn when they learn to use HLP, 1 milliliter of beer with 14 milliliters of HLP in a 15 milliliter test tube. We ended up increasing that to 5 milliliters of beer with 10 milliliters of HLP. I also bumped up my incubation temperature to at least 30 degrees C. And now we incubate for 15 days at least. I ran a bunch of tests with these beers that we knew had been contaminated and figured out basically what conditions I could get the acetotolerance to grow at in HLP. And now we follow that protocol. Another thing that we did was we used to have a really crappy Maheen bottler, and it's full of soft parts. We would ATP swab those soft parts right after a CIP run, and we were getting ATP numbers in the thousands. So it was pretty much impossible to package clean beer on that machine. So then we ended up spending a bunch of money and getting this fancy new GAI bottler, which we can steam clean, and it's all stainless parts that can be steam cleaned. Another change that we made to help prevent this from happening again was we just got a racketeer. We didn't always have one of these, and this basically adds counter pressure to a barrel when you're racking it out, so that air doesn't get sucked into the hole as you rack the barrel out. And we also got, like I said before, an inline pasteurizer. So basically after all this, long story short, I ended up in school to get a master's degree. Jackie O's is funding my degree. So we decided on a project that would help detect lactobacillus acetotolerance in a quicker time than our 15-day time frame now. So I'm focusing on designing real-time polymerase chain reaction, or qPCR primers, that target 3 different genes in the viable that are involved in the viable but non-culturable state of lactobacillus acetotolerance. So acetotolerance is notoriously slow growing, and sometimes it's really hard to grow and won't grow at all. So PCR is a good alternative to detect it. And basically I chose these 3 different genes that are involved in different aspects of the viable but non-culturable state. And I'm testing those primers now, and also working on testing DNA extraction methods. I'm mostly focused on using the Bio-Rad Instagene matrix, but if anybody has any DNA extraction methods for beer with PCR that work well for them, I would love if you could share them. And other than that, I wanted to acknowledge, thank all of you for being here. And I also wanted to thank Ryanne and all the people who have shared their stories over the past few weeks, and all the people who are working towards a better brewing industry for everybody. And if anybody's interested, here's some different organizations that offer consulting and educational resources for breweries when it comes to inclusivity and diversity. And Jackie O's is looking into these. We haven't actually had any classes with any of them yet, but I know our upper management is reaching out, so we'll see. And other than that, if anybody has any questions, also feel free to email me or Jarret ever if you guys have questions for us.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. That was really, it's so cool to see all of the different breweries and labs. And one thing I loved about your presentation was how much collaboration goes on. I know within Maine, I can see it happening with the breweries we work with, but you know, doing these talks, I've really seen how widespread it is among the community, you know, between the beer that Spencer sent to us, which I thought was awesome. They were Creature Comforts is our last behind the tap room, and the Athens to Athens collaboration between your 2 breweries, I had no idea. And you working with Zach and Mike over there at Allagash and with the university there, it's really cool to see all of that collaboration going on. I have a couple questions that have popped up. I have my own questions, but I'll save those for if we have time. But we've got a few questions already for the 2 of you. And we can probably stop screen sharing so everybody can see you. I got it.
Okay, thank you.
A little better. Yeah, no problem. And we can always pop it back up again if we need to. First question is, do you recommend using UVA plus cyclohexamide over the WLD media?
That's a good question. To be honest, we haven't used WLD. I used to use SDA, but for some reason, there's another name for SDA. I'm sorry, I don't remember it, but LMDA, that's what it is. But I used to use that media, but for some reason I had a hard time making it sterile. Lots of false positives. So I switched to UBA and it seems to work well for us.
Excellent, thank you. Next question, did you find out the source of the 2017-2018 contamination other than the old bottling line? So anything else bringing in that bacteria than the bottling line, or was that it?
That's a great question. We honestly did not really pin down that exact source. We kind of just like went nuclear on everything and tried to fix any possible issues. It's hard to say because I didn't ever detect it until it was in a bottle. So it's hard to say where it came from.
Yeah. Oh, but you're still on the lookout for it all the time now.
All the time, yeah.
Okay, so next, I'm just like pummeling the questions at you. You're really awesome at concise answers. Here's the next question. We are currently validating our micro testing and we are getting issues with false positives on our aerobic bacteria plates. We are using pre-poured plates and LFH, Bunsen, sterilize the work, etc., and send paired samples to an external lab, which shows no growth on their copies of the sample. Do you have any suggestions for plating and sample storage best practices which we could try?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things that we've learned about false positives and how we can get them with sampling. Maybe you already do this, but a good idea is always just to have a blank negative plate and see if anything grows on that, because while you're plating, you'll just set out your negative plate, open it a little bit like you would with a plate that's drying, for example. And if anything grows on that, then that'll give you a good indication that it might be the air quality that you're in the area that you're plating in. Another thing, I don't know if you're using a hood, but I tried with a flame and no hood for a long time and had a lot of false positives. Basically, it was an air quality issue.
It does say they're using a laminar flow hood. That's what LFH means.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Well,
then, yeah, that should not be your issue as long as that's working properly. The other thing, it's really easy to contaminate your sample as you pull it. I don't know if that's potentially an issue, but the way that we do it when we're pulling from a perlick, for example, we'll spray the perlick out with alcohol, and then we take an alcohol soaked swab and swab all inside the perlick and like the outside, because I don't know if you ever noticed, like the end of a perlick might catch a little drip and that'll like turn into like caramel on the end of it. So you make sure you swab and get any beer, anything off that perlick, and then we spray it again real good with alcohol, and then we torch it with the blowtorch. And that seems to work well. Also, just make sure that your tube handling technique is aseptic and you're not like touching the inside of your tube lids or anything. And yeah, I don't know if that helps, but.
Yeah, I think those are all really good suggestions. And every time we have questions like that, it makes me so happy to be a chemist where I don't have to worry about microbes on my side of the lab, but we do for our testing side. But next question we have is from Krista. When you are propagating yeast, do you do any type of microbial testing along the way to ensure that any itsy bitsy bugs have not infected your slurry? And she also puts in there, which I also second, as thanks for mentioning the rat magnet movement.
Thank you. Yeah, Jarret does a great job basically at pulling and plating samples. So we pretty much plate every step of the way. I would say when we do our propagation and we start with 59 gallons in the prop tank. And then the next day we add 100 more gallons. We don't always plate that 59 gallons if we know we're going to add 100 gallons to it the next day, just because it's going to get that 100 gallons regardless. And yeah, we're not going to see anything grow in a day on that plate. So yeah. Excellent.
And the last question I have for right now, unless somebody else pops one in, is do you use any flavor standards for your sensory training? Do you recommend any brands?
We do. I mean, we use off flavors. We don't really. I know there is like definitely some positive flavored standards that you can use as well, but mainly we use if we do use flavor standards to spike a sample to make sure that our people that are our sensory panelists are up to date, and like you want to spike a sample, make sure they can pick out diacetyl out of a beer or acetaldehyde. We don't get too crazy with it. I know there's a ton of different off flavors at beers that can be in beer, so it would be a very big task to do every single one. I know Cellarman, they do our diacetyl tests. They get trained in the diacetyl testing. They'll test their threshold of being able to see when they detect diacetyl in beer, at what levels. I don't remember the brand. Do you remember the brand?
We get them from Siebel.
Yeah, Siebel.
Yeah, I don't know if I honestly have just always used Siebel because that's what I knew about, but so I'm not quite sure of other brands either.
But yeah, mostly just use it for negative testing. We don't really use any positive flavors. You're not really. You kind of know when you're looking, you find a positive flavor. So yeah, we do use them every now and then, especially Cellarman for diacetyl training to make sure that they're being able to detect a certain threshold of diacetyl. Like I said, you never want to like put stuff on sensory just for fun, but say there is a day when you're like, I don't really know what to put on sensory. It's pretty easy just to go grab a pitcher of beer and spike it at diacetyl. It's always a good time.
Excellent. I know everybody's sensory program is different, and it's very much on what you're focused on looking for, right? So those are what your highlights are, then that's great. And I'm sure it'll expand over time too as you do different things. And I love how you have the desks set up. I think that's a really smart maneuver.
That was our last. We did have a person mostly doing sensory in house, and that was his idea. And we went with it for sure. Yeah, it was a good ad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've seen everything from people just kind of sitting around the table together to those really specialized rooms where you're getting the beer through the window. So
nice
it's good.
room where there's not much going on and people can really focus on the beer. You don't want outside noise. That's what the nice thing is of having a separate room away from the brewery, because the brewery is very loud and there's music always playing. So and definitely a ton of different smells down there as well. So having a room that's a very boring room is always a good idea to have for concentrating on your samples.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, I don't see any other questions coming up, and we're at 5 o'clock. So I just want to thank you both so much for doing this. It was really neat to see your lab. And I did want to highlight, you're doing so much in that space. And it's not very big, right? I mean, we saw the picture of it right before it was built. And Jarret, you walked us around, but I don't think it wasn't as obvious when you walked us around it.
Yeah, it's not that big. I think it might be like 50 feet long and like 20 feet wide, maybe. It's
not too bad.
Yeah, it's not horrible. But yeah, we get a lot of stuff done here. I mean, we could definitely knock down some walls and get a huge lab one day. That'd be awesome. But no complaining here.
Well, maybe next time we see you, that's what'll happen. But
I just want a window.
think a window.
Yeah. Not having a window is not the great. The worst part about being in the lab is not having a window.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you both so much. Ryan, good luck with your masters. Jarret, congrats on the first Zoom you've done, which I think is just amazing. Yeah, we'll have to send you to some QC2 shirts and just thank you so much. It's been really cool experience to see your program way out there in Ohio. So everybody who's joined us, we'll send an email out eventually with the recording of our webinar today. And if you have any questions, you can get a hold of Ryan or Jarret through their emails, or send the lab an email and we can get you in touch with them. If you want to thank our speakers, feel free to pop something into the chat. We do have one more question if you two can stick around for just a second while people exit. But our last question was, how are you doing with documentation of your procedures and learning to train new people and ensure consistency? That's a big question to end with.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, the question is, how are you doing with documentation of your procedures and learning to train new people and ensure consistency?
Oh, like in general or in sensory?
Yeah, I don't know. SOPs are definitely important in the lab. Ryan did a pretty good job of, when I first started, there was already a good groundwork of SOPs, standard operating procedures. Keeping, you think things that are very simple to you, and you know how to do, like, obviously now I can go back there and just make UBA, LCSM, and HLP without having to look at anything. And I just memorized the amounts of everything. It's great just putting SOPs for things like simple things just like that. And yeah, training new people, especially if you're talking about sensory, that's tough for sure. I've already ran into that problem. You have one, we just had a new cellarman come on not too long ago, and they get a little discouraged, and you want to keep them not sensory just for other lab procedures. Yeah, okay, yeah, lab procedures. Yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah, I guess SOPs for sure. So to be honest, I guess so. Jarret's like the second and a half person that I've had to train in the lab, ish, something like that. So it's not like I've done too much of it, but basically SOPs and practice, and then and making sure that people are doing it well. I mean, when it comes to like plating and things like that, negative and positive controls are always a good option. And then also just kind of maybe like hanging out with people as they learn versus letting them go off on their own if it's not something they're comfortable with yet.
Yeah, I think those are all really good recommendations for training. We have a lovely revolving workforce every year. So we're always training, it feels like, but that's exactly what we're doing. SOPs, showing the students, watching them do it, having them test a beer we know the values of already, making sure they fall within our standards, and then making sure they can do it on their own. But luckily, you don't have to do that as often as we do, but it is something that you really want to make sure is consistent. So. Excellent. Well, with that, I won't keep you two any longer. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
All right. Enjoy.